All right, YouTube, we've got some possible Libyan happenings again. Again with the embassies, just as before, of course, last February when, the embassy over there was sacked and Ambassador Stevens was apparently dragged around flaming and screaming and tortured and people died, and then Obama blamed it on a video, and then, of course, we learned that wasn't the case, and then Hillary said, "What difference does it make?" It looks like it's happening again, only this time they're, I guess, better prepared than before and trying to play it exactly as safe as they can so that we don't have another Libyan upset. I think at this point, people like Obama and Hillary are realizing any more instability in Libya can't be good for their approval numbers, and they've actually decided to take action. Here on CNN, Libya evacuation decision minute by minute, U.S. official says. Apparently, the unrest that is now resurging in Libya because of an anti-Islamist general who doesn't want Sharia law for the country. Apparently, he's begun attacking various things, and the Islamists are taking up arms and attacking things. And the situation is evolving, I should say devolving, spiraling into more and more violence. Of course, the parliament was just stormed not that long ago, last Sunday. So they've moved more aircraft here onto this base in Italy. Sigonella, Italy, to join 4 additional V-22 Osprey arrived overnight to join 4 V-22s and 200 Marines that had been moved there last week. Now, 200 Marines could probably level the entirety of Tripoli in a weekend without any casualties. But what's not clear is why we're getting this forewarning. We realize that things are heating up there, and we're preparing to evacuate people from this embassy in case hell breaks loose. This is bad for people like Obama and Hillary because people are then asking the question, well, why weren't we this prepared, and why didn't we have several days forewarning the last time around when the embassy was, laid torch to? And the answer is not clear. Of course, that memo that just came out not that long ago, about a month ago, clearly shows that the White House was instructing Jay Carney and others to lie directly to the American people and persist in this myth that this was a spontaneous protest before when the embassy was attacked last February, that had arisen because of a YouTube video. And they can, debate semantics. They've said, well, this was just talking about general unrest in the region. It wasn't talking about this specific event, which is bullshit. Everyone knows it's bullshit. Anyone giving them a pass on that, the press certainly did not give them a pass, which was surprising. NBC's correspondent there grilled Carney for about 20 minutes solid. Some gave them, MSNBC and CNN don't care because Obama is their God-fearer, just like Bush was for Fox, and nobody questioned anything that he did until his approval was already hitting pay dirt, so to speak, thrown down the well. It's really sad because when Bush did something wrong, the right wing refused to acknowledge it. And you had nothing but leftists crying about how bad he was. And now that Obama's in office, the right wing are the ones saying that he's doing things wrong, and the left refuses to budge and acknowledge that anything's been done. They refuse to acknowledge the mistakes that are being made. Again, that football team mentality that I talked about before several times, of us versus them, left versus right, Democrats and Republicans, like them having a letter after their name makes them fundamentally different, which clearly is not the case. At least 2 people were killed and 66 injured Sunday in Tripoli, according to the health ministry. Fighters armed with heavy weapons moved in on the General National Congress as Sunday's session was adjourned. The attackers stormed the building as members were evacuated. Fighting then spread to other parts of the city. So Libya is continuing to be unstable, possibly destabilizing further, which shouldn't surprise anybody, because as it was also widely reported, these Libyan Islamists, the ones that were attacking the embassy before, and which, let's face it, might be the ones that attack it now, it's probably not going to be this secularist general that does it, that were attacking things, were being armed by the United States. They were being given weapons and training and money. It's exactly the same thing that we did in Afghanistan in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan. Obama's policies might be best seen, oddly enough, as a throwback to the Reagan years. sponsoring proxy wars, sponsoring overthrows in the third world, whereas Bush, for all of his faults, preferred a more direct approach. He said, fuck it, and just stormed in with the full force of the US military in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, neither policy seems to have really profited us at all. Iraq is only marginally better off now than it was while the fighting was going on. Afghanistan continues to fall apart. We've made basically no progress in either of these countries. No progress, likewise, has been made in Libya, despite the so-called best intentions of people like Obama and Hillary. Despite the best intentions of the current administration, things in Egypt continue to unravel. There are continual problems there as well. And Egypt is the one country among them that to some extent restabilized. And there are still deep-seated problems in this region. We've got problems all over the Middle East. It's taken multiple administrations using the same types of failed policies over and over and over and over again to unravel that part of the world to this point. It's not clear exactly what they're doing. Now, here's the thing. Obama's taking a leaf out of the book of Reagan, which is Reagan armed the Taliban and armed the Mujahideen, gave them weapons, money, training, said, go fight the Soviets. They're a bunch of atheists. You should stand up for Islam. Okay, well, we'll go fight them. And then it spawned Osama, and we had 9/11, several decades later. Obama is clearly using the same failed strategy here. He's arming these groups, he's arming the Libyan rebels, arming people in Egypt, arming Syrian rebels, arming Boko Haram, and even stating before, by the way, I believe several years ago, to the Nigerian government that we were no longer going to comply militarily with them and do exercises with them on the basis that they were fighting Boko Haram. And now look, they feign outrage and say bring back our girls to these same Boko Haram extremists that we were again funding and training to begin with. So I have to assume something about the people that are currently in charge. That means Obama, Hillary, Carney, Holder, all of these people, anyone associated with the current administration, including people in the intelligence community, and probably including people in the military. Although I would like to believe that the military generals are smarter than this. They know that things are going wrong and that they're actually outraged and they just can't do anything about it because they don't get the airtime necessary to actually speak out. And of course, Obama's their, unfortunately, commander-in-chief. I have to assume that one of three things is true. Either Obama is ignorant of history, hasn't read about the arming of the Mujahideen, and honestly doesn't know what repercussions might be in the future. Or he knows that there will be repercussions in the future. He does understand the history behind this sort of proxy conflict, and he just doesn't care because he realizes he'll be out of office by the time things spiral out of control, more than likely, and he doesn't have to deal with it. Or he's hoping for a short-term benefit to pay himself off. Or there's some sort of ulterior motive going on here. People have suggested the House of Saud, people have suggested the Israelis. It's probably a fusion of the two, plus other interested parties. It's probably involves businesses that profit from the war industry, specifically armaments and ammunition and things. It's probably all of the above. In any case, regardless of the reasoning behind why we're arming these groups, most of which are absolutely despicable, the Syrian rebels arguably are worse than Assad. Regardless of your thoughts on Assad, the Syrian rebels are doing catastrophic damage to everything they can get their hands on, and executing civilians regularly. There are even groups in that part of the world right now, like ISIS, that are so hardline, so insane, and so bloodthirsty that even Al-Qaeda has shunned them. And we're giving these people weapons. Why? Those are the only three reasons I can think of. Either Obama's ignorant, Obama's pandering and doesn't care, or there's some sort of secret plot or secret plan that's being hatched up and probably has been in effect longer than I've been alive as to why they would want to arm these groups and destabilize the entire Middle East. People will say, well, obviously the New World Order wants to annex all the land, so they're just going to let everything collapse. Well, it doesn't explain exactly why we're also propping these regimes up. Ironically, we're putting Islamists in charge when the last administration was spending most of its time butchering Islamists and trying to prop up secular democratic regimes. Now we're trying to prop up democratic regimes, only it keeps failing over and over, and we always get an Islamist government because most of those people either do support Islamism and theocracy, or they're forced into supporting it because they're afraid they'll get beaten in an alleyway or executed or raped if they vote against them. This strategy that the United States is using currently does not work. It hasn't worked in the past. It has nothing to do with, by the way, just Obama. Reagan tried this in the early 1980s when the Soviet Union was attempting to expand into Afghanistan, when they were attempting to gain control of those mineral fields that they really wanted for their economy and to push south, probably to the Indian Ocean as well. When that was happening, that was Reagan's administration. And very shortly prior to that, Carter expressed interest in that as well. But Reagan was the one that brought it to fruition. He's like the father of modern Republican ideals. And he used the same exact strategy, lock, stock, and barrel, that Obama is using now. And it did not work in the 1980s. Yes, the Soviets lost. It also crushed the Afghan economy. It spread these militant groups throughout the Middle East and gave them essentially a homeland to operate from that we couldn't touch because it's right next to all of these other countries that don't like us either. Makes it very difficult, and it's a rugged, mountainous, steppe-filled country anyway with people who really don't like the West. And we're propping up all these Islamist regimes. Well, that sort of strategy may have made sense at the time because the Soviet Union are a bunch of secularists and the United States is a Christian nation, and we may not agree with Islam, but we can sort of see where you're coming from, and we really don't like the Russians either, so here's some weapons. Here's some, anti-tank devices, and here's how to make this ID, and here's 100,000, go buy yourself some Coca-Cola, and all of that. It may have made sense at the time, but it didn't work. You would think that the administration now, which presents itself as being competent, Obama was compared to Bush positively, and people said, well, he's competent. He's not a dumbass like Bush was, and yet he's using a failed Reagan-era strategy, which, by the way, isn't even just Reagan's strategy. It happened as early as the 1950s when we were influencing the Iranians and got the Islamists into power there. And guess what happened? Now Iran's squarely in the Russian sphere because people realized that we had fucked up their country so badly, they said, well, we're just going to partner with the other side because these Americans are insane. I don't understand. I don't think anybody understands exactly why they are doing this. Why we're funding groups that we were just fighting a decade ago. Why we're funding these groups anyway, considering that the strategy itself has been tried before. It doesn't make fundamental sense. If something doesn't work, it doesn't suddenly start working just because you wish on a twinkling star. It doesn't start working because you find a four-leaf clover on the White House lawn and say, oh, this is my lucky day. I'm sure Boko Haram would never cause any problems with the secular government of Nigeria. I'm sure that the Syrian rebels, if they take over, won't simply execute 1 million Alawites. I'm sure, and Kurds and all of these other groups. I'm sure that if we influence the Egyptians and we oversee these protests and proclaim support for them, I'm sure that the government won't become an Islamist hardline government, then fall apart and leave a vacuum filled by the military. I'm sure that Libya won't destabilize and result in our embassy getting half burned to the ground and the death of one of our ambassadors. And then subsequently, a year later, we'll be planning to evacuate again because the same thing's happening. What are we doing in the Middle East, in North Africa and Nigeria? It doesn't make any sense. We've ruined these, if anything, we've actually pushed these countries away from us through our foreign policy. It just doesn't make any sense. I can understand the logic post 9/11 that Bush used. I think he was wrong. I think that he was an idiot. I think that he overextended our armed forces and did grave harm to our relations specifically with the Europeans. Specifically when we went into Iraq. No one really blamed us when we attacked the Afghanis because we thought Osama was there, even though Benazir Bhutto said Osama was dead as early as 2002 and that it was a fruitless endeavor, and then she gets magically assassinated just like the SEAL team that supposedly killed him, which we still haven't seen evidence of, but I'm not going to get into conspiracy territory here. The foreign policy that we put into place to deal with these Middle Eastern nations and these North African nations, and now other parts of Africa because Islamic theocracy is attempting to spread its tentacles into West Africa simply isn't working. It's not working at all. And we see it not working. And yet we're still using the same policy. It's like a person, he's stuck on a broken record. Obama has become a broken record, saying over and over again, well, we support this populist movement. We support this people's revolution. And it never comes to pass, because as soon as the people, so-called, take power and they institute a democracy, they vote in an Islamic hardline government that's even less friendly towards the United States than before. It's a self-defeating policy. And yes, those people have every right to vote those governments in. The problem being that those groups that we've just armed are now so well armed they can bully people into voting for them who don't even like them. Like happened in Egypt with their obviously faulty election. Like happened in Libya. Like what will happen everywhere in these countries that we are essentially overthrowing. Because it isn't truly the people's will that these Islamists should rise to dominance. A lot of these people are liberalized. They want to be part of the Western democratic world because they see that it works, generally speaking. But the United States is making it very difficult, because in an effort to unleash the forces of democracy and to topple these various dictatorships and corrupt so-called democratic regimes and theocratic states, we're just getting more theocrats and more corrupt oligarchs in power. It doesn't make sense. So right now, we might be on the cusp of yet another Libyan evacuation. Yay, and I'm sure that if something goes wrong and the evacuation gets fucked up and people die or anything happens, or the embassy gets sneak attacked and shooting starts and people die, or we're forced to evacuate and the Islamists move in and turn it into a mosque, or anything else happens, I'm sure that there will be interesting excuses followed by media silence, because the media for some reason largely still supports Obama, just as there was media silence in the Bush administration after we invaded Iraq on trumped-up pretenses, which were never true, because, again, of that football team mentality. It's very sad to see. I mean, you feel sorry for the Libyan people, because all they wanted was a functioning democracy. And the United States, which presumably was trying to help them get this functioning democracy, subsequently saw them thus being taken over, as they are now, by a bunch of Sharia law supporters. So now they're going to become far worse.